Imagine Prince William discovering that his youngest son had reportedly been stopped from entering a place he believed was part of his own family's world. No public ceremony, no constitutional crisis, just a confused child wondering why a familiar door was suddenly closed to him. A dramatic royal account claims that this moment triggered an intense disagreement involving William, Catherine, Queen Camilla, and eventually King Charles. But behind the sensational confrontation lies a deeper story about family, authority, and belonging. Stay with us to the end, and subscribe now for more royal family stories and discussions. According to the account, Prince Louis had previously visited the Windsor residence with his family without expecting unusual restrictions. That familiarity supposedly made what happened next especially confusing. During one visit, Louis approached a private family area only to be stopped and told that he needed permission. The narrative attributes particularly harsh wording to Camilla, although no independently verified record confirms the exact conversation. Catherine allegedly noticed immediately that Louis was confused rather than angry. To him, this wasn't a debate about royal authority. It was simply a question of why somewhere familiar suddenly seemed forbidden. The story claims Louis responded by explaining that he understood Windsor to belong, in a broad family sense, to all of them. Such a comment from a child might appear completely innocent, yet the narrative suggests it touched an existing sensitivity surrounding household boundaries. Catherine supposedly recognized the tension and quickly redirected Louis before the exchange became more uncomfortable. She initially hoped the moment would simply disappear. According to the account, however, what happened after Catherine and Louis left transformed a brief, awkward encounter into something much more serious, because an alleged household instruction was then issued specifically concerning the young prince. Staff were supposedly told that Louis should not return without Camilla's personal approval. This is one of the story's central allegations, but the supplied material does not provide authenticated household records proving such an instruction existed. If true, the significant issue would not merely be that a residence had rules. Private residences can obviously have boundaries. The problem, from William's alleged perspective, was that neither parent had been consulted before a restriction affecting their child was introduced. That distinction supposedly turned an uncomfortable family moment into a much larger argument about respect, communication, and who possessed authority within Windsor. When William allegedly learned what had happened, his first concern wasn't royal protocol. The story portrays him asking Catherine whether Louis had personally understood that he was being denied entry. Once she confirmed how confused their son had become, William's reaction supposedly changed. He could tolerate disagreements directed toward himself, but involving George, Charlotte, or Louis crossed a different boundary. The account describes him viewing the situation primarily as a father rather than as heir to the throne. Again, his exact private reaction cannot be independently confirmed, but that parental framing becomes the emotional foundation for everything that follows. Catherine's role is quieter, but arguably more important. According to the narrative, Louis wondered whether he had done something wrong. Instead of explaining the adult disagreement, Catherine supposedly focused on reassuring him that his place within his family had not changed. This is where the story moves beyond royal titles. A child doesn't necessarily understand disputes about residences, hierarchy, or household authority. He understands whether adults make him feel welcome. The account uses that simple distinction effectively. While senior royals were allegedly debating boundaries, Catherine's immediate concern was ensuring that Louis did not interpret an adult disagreement as personal rejection. William supposedly decided that the issue required a direct conversation with Camilla. The narrative portrays him arriving determined to avoid advisors and carefully drafted palace language. Rather than beginning with broader questions about Windsor, He allegedly asked whether she had personally authorized the restriction involving Louis. Camilla is portrayed as defending the decision as an issue of household order rather than hostility toward the child. Neither the conversation nor the quotations attributed to them are independently verified. Nevertheless, the alleged exchange exposes the central disagreement. Camilla supposedly saw a boundary around a residence, while William saw a boundary placed around his son. The disagreement reportedly intensified when Camilla argued that William's children could not assume unrestricted access to every royal space simply because their father was the heir. Within the narrative, this was the moment William realized the issue extended beyond one doorway. He believed his children were being drawn into a larger struggle over influence and the approaching generational transition. The story attributes an explosive demand to William telling Camilla to leave Windsor, but there is no reliable confirmation that those words were actually spoken. What matters to the narrative is the line they represent. Adult royal tensions should never be enforced through children. Once King Charles supposedly learned about the confrontation, the situation became far more complicated. The story places him between several roles at once: husband to Camilla, father to William, grandfather to Louis, and sovereign, responsible for maintaining stability within the institution. Rather than immediately supporting either side, Charles is portrayed as asking what actually happened to his grandson. The account claims one detail particularly troubled him: the suggestion that Louis had been left wondering whether he belonged. Again, the private conversation is unverified, but emotionally, it reframes the dispute. What sounded like household administration suddenly looked like a family problem. Camilla allegedly defended herself by explaining that the restriction was never motivated by personal dislike of Louis. Instead, the narrative suggests she had become increasingly uneasy about William's household, behaving with greater confidence around Windsor as the future generation of the monarchy. That explanation introduces an important distinction without excusing the alleged decision. Adults can have legitimate disagreements about boundaries and changing roles, but children cannot reasonably be expected to understand those anxieties. According to the story, Camilla attempted to establish control over a larger concern, but selected the worst possible place to demonstrate it: a rule directly affecting an 8-year-old child. Charles supposedly focused on one practical question: why hadn't William or Catherine been contacted before the alleged restriction was imposed? The story claims Camilla returned to arguments about household authority, but Charles remained concerned that a decision involving their grandson had apparently been made without parental discussion. Eventually, the narrative says he insisted that any restriction on Louis be lifted immediately. Importantly, this does not establish that Charles ordered Camilla from Windsor or formally sided with William. The supplied material offers no official documentation of either action. Within the story, however, Charles's refusal to defend the alleged ban dramatically changes the balance. The account then claims Camilla temporarily withdrew from the residence while the disagreement cooled. This should not be confused with verified evidence that she was formally evicted or removed from royal life. No official documentation establishing such an eviction is supplied. Yet within the narrative, the temporary departure becomes symbolic. William remains determined that his children will not become leverage in adult disputes, while Camilla is forced to reconsider how an attempt to assert authority created the opposite result. What began as an alleged effort to define her boundaries supposedly left those boundaries looking less secure than they had before the confrontation began. At this stage, Catherine supposedly recognized something neither confrontation nor withdrawal could solve. Louis might once again have access, but simply reopening a door would not erase the feeling that he had somehow caused the disagreement. Rather than treating William's apparent victory as the end of the matter, Catherine allegedly requested a private conversation with Camilla. The narrative portrays this as an important shift away from palace hierarchy. There would be no lawyers, advisors, or competing claims of authority. Catherine's objective was much simpler: make sure a child didn't carry responsibility for a conflict created entirely by the adults around him. During that supposed meeting, Catherine reportedly told Camilla that Louis had begun wondering whether she simply didn't like him. That claim cannot be independently verified, but within the story it changes Camilla's perspective immediately. Household rules might sound defensible when discussed between adults. They sound very different when translated into what an 8-year-old believes they mean. Catherine allegedly emphasized that children often remember emotional experiences long after adults forget the argument behind them. The point wasn't to defeat Camilla in another confrontation. It was to show that whatever political or household concern existed, Louis had experienced the consequence personally. The most affecting part of the narrative comes when Catherine supposedly reveals that Louis wondered whether he should apologize, despite not understanding what he had done wrong. That moment allegedly caused Camilla to recognize how badly the situation had been handled. The account claims she accepted that resentment toward adult changes within Windsor had inadvertently landed on a child. Again, these are private conversations for which the supplied story provides no independent confirmation. But as a family lesson, the message is powerful when children start accepting blame for conflicts they did not create. The adults involved have allowed their disagreement to travel too far. The story eventually imagines a direct meeting between Camilla and Louis. William supposedly agreed only after Catherine believed the conversation would genuinely focus on repairing the child's feelings rather than defending household authority. Camilla is portrayed as telling Louis that he had done nothing wrong and that he remained part of the family. Whether such an apology occurred is unverified. Yet this is a far stronger resolution than another dramatic royal confrontation. Louis doesn't supposedly demand explanations or victories.